PAILs and rails, what they are and how we use them. So PAILs and rails stands for progressive angular isometric loading, and rails stands for regressive angular isometric loading. Basically, it's how do we create more strength in the gap between our mobility and our flexibility. For example, to recap what mobility and flexibility are, if I try and pull my finger up as high as I can, that's the end of my mobility of that finger. My flexibility is with the assistance, I have an increased range of motion there. And that part is the gap in between those two. As far as your index finger is concerned, building strength there probably isn't that important. But let's say hanging from a pull-up bar, you have the ability to get your arm all the way back in line with your body. But if you were to raise your arm up, that's all the higher it goes. So we have a gap in between our flexibility and our mobility. And if we want to be able to take advantage of that range of motion, to have strength in that range of motion and lessen the gap in between those two, we need to build strength in that gap. And the PAILs and rails is a fantastic protocol to do so. It's not about movement in those ranges of motion. It's about training the tissues and strengthening the tissues in those positions. The way that we create our positions is designed for you not to be able to move. So it's not a movement, but it's a training of tissues, a training of how do we create strength in these positions to then increase what that mobility is. So for example, if we're doing a hip 90-90 PAILs and rails, and we're working on increasing our hips' internal rotation, our hips' ability to rotate inward. So the first part of that protocol is sitting into a stretch. For this one, an easy way to figure out what that stretch position is, okay, what's my mobility? I'm going to rotate in that hip as high as I can, and then if I settle on back to where I touch, that's the end range of my mobility. And then if I fight and sit back a little bit more, which is where we want to be a little bit into that passive range of motion, I'm now sitting just outside of my mobility. And the first stage is hanging out there for about 2 minutes and just getting our body acclimated into this position. After we sit there for the prescribed amount of that stretch time, we then get into the PAILs and rails protocol. And in this instance, it's purely about what's going on in the hip. And we want to primarily use our glute to drive that rotation. So we're going to try and use our glute muscles to rotate that femur, rotate that hip externally, and we build up that rotation, we build up that power, we build up that contraction over a period of time, and then we try to rotate the other direction. So what's going on here is certain parts of my hip are getting shorter, so certain parts of my hip are getting longer. And that's what we're doing. We're teaching our tissues how to function, how to create strength, and how to build strength in a little bit beyond where it's comfortable building strength. So we build strength in that next range of motion, and all of a sudden that starts to become an active range of motion. And we can repeat this process as needed to create strength and lessen the gap in between our flexibility and our mobility. Have fun with this protocol.